Hey everyone, welcome to a new Tuts Plus tutorial. I'm Adi, and in this video you'll learn about Flexbox alignment. Now, we all know about Flexbox. It's this amazing CSS layout model that makes aligning and positioning elements very simple. There is a lot to learn about it, and we covered it in detail on Envato Tuts Plus. Anamonis wrote this fantastic series of 3 articles on the subject, and if you prefer a written version, I highly recommend you check those out. If you're more comfortable with video, then stick around for this one, because you're going to learn things like the 2 axes, the various alignment properties you can use, how to align elements along the 2 axes, and finally, single line and multi-line alignment. So I think we should jump straight in. But before we do that, I want to quickly tell you about Envato Elements. With one subscription, you'll have unlimited access to assets like fonts, mockups, CMS templates, and more. There are millions of digital assets to choose from. They have simple commercial licensing, and you can cancel anytime. Subscribe now using the link in the video description. All right, now back to Flexbox. It all starts with the 2 axes. So not axes, we're not chopping wood here, but axes. That's the plural for axis. So 1 axis, 2 axes. Now, we all remember the X, Y, and Z axes from the math classes, right? Well, it's pretty similar with Flexbox, except here we have a main axis and a cross axis. And you'll see that the cross axis is always perpendicular to the main axis, as you can see from this beautiful drawing. Based on that drawing, you might think that Flexbox is a 2-dimensional model, and you'd be wrong. It's actually a 1-dimensional model, meaning the flex items will always flow in the direction of the main axis. That's why it's called main. The cross axis is used for other things, as you'll see in just a little bit. Now, here's the cool part about Flexbox. From what you've seen so far, the main axis is positioned horizontally and the cross axis vertically, right? But they're not fixed in this position. The main axis can also be vertical, and because the cross axis is always perpendicular, it will become horizontal. Pretty cool. So the very first thing you need to do when using Flexbox is to define the direction of the main axis. For that, we'll be using the flex direction property. The definition goes like this. The flex direction CSS property sets how flex items are placed in the flex container, defining the main axis and the direction, normal or reversed. It can have 4 possible values: row, row reverse, column, and column reverse. So what does it all mean? Let's look at a demo. Here we are in CodePen with a very simple demo. I have a div class flex container, which has 9 flex items inside it, and each one is numbered from 1 to 9. In terms of CSS, I just wrote some demo styling for presentation purposes only. This has nothing to do with Flexbox. So, as I was saying, the very first thing you need to do when working with Flexbox is to define the direction of the main axis. We do that with the flex direction property. But first, we need to specify that, hey, this is actually a flex container. So then, flex direction, the default value for this is row. Now this will set the direction of the main axis to horizontal, and the starting point will be the left side. The ending point will be the right side. So it displays items from left to right in a horizontal fashion. The other value is row reverse. This will also set the direction of the main axis to horizontal, but the starting point will now be the right side and the ending point the left side. So items will be displayed in a horizontal manner, starting from right to left. Okay, so row, left to right, row reverse, right to left. Now, I just want to make a quick mention here. This direction, left to right, right to left, also depends on the direction of the document. So if your document is a standard left to right, row, the value of row will display items from left to right, and row reverse from right to left. But if you set the direction of the document from right to left, so RTL, then the row value will also display items right to left, and row reverse will display them left to right. So it's the other way around. In case you don't know, you can change the direction of an HTML document, the writing direction, when you're using other languages, like, for example, Arabic, Hebrew, I believe. These are both written from right to left, as opposed to English, which is written left to right. Okay, let's go back to Flexbox. So these two values, row and row reverse, will display items horizontally. To display items vertically, you would use column or column reverse. So column and column reverse will both set the direction of the main axis to vertical. And because flex items always follow the direction of the main axis, they will be displayed in a vertical fashion. So this is column. It goes from top to bottom, and column reverse will go from bottom to top. So vertical, but bottom to top. So it's the other way around. And that's how you use flex direction. Now, let me introduce you to another Flexbox property called wrap. Wrapping is useful for situations exactly like this one, where we have some flex items that overflow their flex container because their total width is higher than the width of the flex container. In that case, I would like any items that overflow to be automatically positioned on a new line. We do that with the flex wrap property, and here we can set three values. No wrap is the default. Wrap is the second one, and that will automatically form rows, and these will actually resize depending on the width of the parent. And you can also specify a wrap reverse, which, just like the other reverse properties, it works backwards. So it starts from the bottom to the top instead of from the top to the bottom. Now, flex wrap works regardless of the direction of the main axis. So this is what it looks like when it's horizontal. But when we set the main axis to vertical, and in this case, we must specify a fixed height to see the wrapping work properly. Let's make this actually a little bit bigger, 40 rems. Yeah, you'll see that now the items also wrap, but they wrap in the direction of the cross axis instead of the main axis. So in this case, when a flex direction is set to column, the main axis is vertical, the cross axis is horizontal. So flex wrapping will start laying down items in the direction of the cross axis. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. If we set column reverse, then items will be displayed in the opposite way from bottom to top. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. If we set the flex wrapping to wrap reverse, then the items start from this corner right here. So it goes from right to left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. So it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. In most cases, you would either use row or column as a flex direction, and you would use wrap as flex wrap. And let's go ahead and comment that bit, and let's switch back to row. Finally, I just want to tell you about a shorthand property called FlexFlow. FlexFlow is a combination between flex direction and flex wrap. So instead of having these two properties individually, I can comment them, and I can simply say row wrap. And it's going to do exactly the same thing. So the first value is for flex direction, the second value is for flex wrap. And I actually recommend you use this shorthand all the time because it's much easier and it saves you a little bit of space here in your code. All right, so now that you understand how the two axes work and you successfully defined the direction of the main axis, it's time you learn how to align the flex items. Okay, so alignment can happen on two directions or on two axes. So you can align items on the main axis and on the cross axis, so both horizontal and vertical. For that, you will use 4 properties: justify content, align items, align self, and align content. Now, here's an easy way to remember which one is for which axis. Justify content is for the main axis. The other 3 are for the cross axis. So the one property called justify is for the one axis, the main, right? The 3 align properties are for the cross axis. Now, I think this is where people get confused a little bit because they use the 3 align properties for the main axis and vice versa. And I think that happens when you change the direction of the main axis. Here's what I mean by that. By default, the direction of the main axis is set to row, so horizontal. In this case, justify content will align items horizontally because it works on the main axis. But if we change the flex direction to column, the main axis will now be vertical. So justify content will align items vertically. Horizontal alignment is now taken care of by the other 3 properties I mentioned: align items, align self, and align content. So I think this is where the confusion comes from, right? You're building 2, 3, 10 layouts with Flexbox using the flex direction of row. And your brain gets used to the fact that, hey, justify content aligns items horizontally. But then when for the 11th project, you're using Flexbox in vertical mode, so you're setting flex direction to column, oops, suddenly it doesn't work anymore. Justify content doesn't align items horizontally. It aligns them vertically. So I hope that makes sense. Now, let's have a look at each one of these 4 properties and see how you can align items with them. First, let's cover the main axis. Let's start with justify content. The definition says the property defines how the browser distributes space between and around content items along the main axis of a Flex container. Wow, that was a mouthful. It has several possible values, but here are 5 we'll be using most often. Flex start, flex end, center, space around, and space between. Let's look at a demo. This is a simplified demo of what you've seen before. We only have 3 flex items instead of 9. The CSS, though, is exactly the same. So we have flex flow set to row, and we're wrapping. Now, justify content, as I was saying, works on the main axis. In our case, the main axis is horizontal, and it goes from left to right. We'll start with flex start. Flex start will align the items at the start of the axis. So because we're going left to right, it aligns items to the left. If we're going to specify flex end, that's going to align items to the end of the axis, which in our case is the right side. Now, if we're going to say row reversing here, well, it's going to be the other way around, isn't it? Because with row reverse, the axis starts from right and goes to the left. So in this case, flex end is the left side, not the right side. But for the rest of this demo, let's stick with normal flow here. So that's flex start and flex end. We also have the option to align the content in the center of our container like this. And the other 2 values are space around. And space around is very interesting. It calculates the available space and then distributes it equally around each item. Space between will actually create equal space between the items, not around them. So we have 173, 173. And that's justify content. So 5 possible values: flex start, flex end, center, space around, and space between. There's also space evenly that tries its best to set up the same space between each item and between items and the edges. It doesn't quite get it sometimes, but it's there if you need it. But as I said, you will most likely use space between most of the time. So that is alignment on the main axis. All right, this is where things get a bit trickier and harder to understand, but it's not difficult. The only reason it gets trickier is because for alignment on the cross axis, we have 3 properties: align items, align self, and align content. So let's have a look at each one of these and see what it's all about. Let's start with align items. This property defines how space is distributed between flex items along the cross axis. For values, the ones we'll be using most often are flex start, flex end, center, stretch, and baseline. We are back in CodePen for another demo. This time I have 5 flex items, but they are not the same in terms of style. We have a different padding for each one, as you can see here. The flex container is set to row wrap. So currently the main axis is horizontal and it goes from left to right. And the cross axis is a vertical. So let's use the align items property to align these 5 items on the cross axis. We'll start with the following. Align items. By default, this is set to stretch. So as you can see, all 5 items have the same height. But if I were to set align items to flex start, you can see their actual sizes and the way they are aligned to the top, right? So in this case, the cross axis goes vertical from top to bottom, and flex start will always point to the start of the axis, which in our case is the top. If I were to select flex end, these items will be aligned at the bottom of the cross axis, or at the end of the cross axis, which in our case is bottom. Center will align these items in the center of the cross axis vertically. And then the last one I want to show you here is baseline. And baseline will actually align items so that their baseline is on the same line. Let me actually show you this. See how all 5 letters sit on the same imaginary line? Well, that's what baseline does for you. So as a quick recap, if you want to align items to the top, you use flex start. If you want to align them to the bottom, flex end. Center is pretty self-explanatory. If you want all items to have the same height, you use stretch, which by the way is the default value. Or if you want to align the text inside to its baselines, or to its baseline, you would use the baseline value. Next, let's see about align self. Align self is exactly the same as align items, except this allows the default alignment, or the one that is specified by align items, to be overridden for individual flex items. In other words, you can use this property selectively on items you want to align differently. It has the same values as align items, and let me show you a quick example. So here we have the same demo as before. I aligned the items in the center, but now let's say I want to align this 5th item and just this 5th item to the bottom. Well, I can target that and I can say align self, flex end. So now you'll see that all the items except the 5th are using this property, but the 5th overrides it because I've specified align self. And I can specify whatever value I want here. I can even specify stretch, and that item will be stretched and the others will not. That's the power of Flexbox. Now notice, align self is always applied to a flex item. The other alignment properties are applied to the flex container. So just keep that in mind. Now, these 2 properties I showed you, align items and align self, are used for single line alignment. So they only work on items that are displayed on a single line. For multi-line alignment, we're going to use align content. This property sets the distribution of space between and around content items along a Flexbox's cross-axis. For values, the ones we'll be using most often are flex start, flex end, center, stretch, space around, and space between. For a demo, I have a similar setup as before, except with more flex items. I have 9 flex items, and each one also has different characteristics, just so you can see how all of this works. Now for flow, I have this set to row and wrap. So the main axis is from left to right, horizontally. Cross axis is vertically from top to bottom. And the items are currently aligned flex start. So at the start of the cross axis, or in English, to the top. Now to see this better, let me add a height of, let's say, 50 rems to this container. And let me remove this stretch here. So align content will decide how the space available on the cross-axis is distributed. Okay? So if we do flex start, it's going to push all of the items to the start of the cross-axis, which is the top. The rest of the space is distributed at the bottom of the cross-axis. If we do the opposite, flex end, you'll see that the items are now aligned to the end of the cross-axis, and the available space is placed at the start of the top of the cross-axis. Center will basically center all items in the middle of the cross-axis, distributing the free space equally on the top and bottom. And then we have stretch, which is the default behavior. This will basically stretch the free space equally, just like you can see here. Then we have space around. So it's going to create an equal amount of space around each item. So right here we have, 99? Here we have 197. And here, again, we have 99. So 99 plus 99 is, 198. So it's exactly the same discussion that we had with justify content when it was allocating space evenly or around the items. Well, it's the same here. So this is space around. Space between will create equal amounts of space between items. And because I have just 2 items here, all the available free space is positioned between these 2 rows. Meaning the first row is aligned to the top, the second row is aligned at the bottom. And finally, there is also space evenly. It basically creates even amounts of space between each row and also between rows and the edges of the flex container. But as I was saying, most often you will either be using flex start, flex end, center, space between, or space around. Now again, just like with everything we've talked before, this depends on the direction you set for your Flexbox or for your main axis. All right, so flex flow is now set to row, but if I change this to column, you'll see that items are now organized differently, and align content will therefore work differently. If I set flex end here, these items will now be displayed or aligned to the right side instead of the left side, because the axes have now shifted direction. That's why it's always important when you decide how to align your content, you need to first set your flex direction properly, or the direction of your main axis. All right, time for some key takeaways. Number 1, Flexbox has a main axis and a perpendicular cross axis. Number 2, Flexbox is a one-dimensional model. Flex items will only flow along the main axis, while the cross axis is used to control the spacing between items. Number 3, you can change the direction of the main axis by using the flex direction property. Number 4, to align items along the main axis, use the justify content property. To align items along the cross axis, use any of the following 3 properties: align items, align self, and align content. Finally, number 5, the align content property will only work in flex containers with wrapping items. All right, that's about it for this video. Don't forget, you can also check out the original written tutorial by Anna Monis by following the link in the video description below. Thanks very much for watching. I'm Adi, and until next time, take care.